Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this India Today election pop-up special here in Mumbai. The next 2 weeks, all eyes will be on Kaun Banega Pradhan Mantri, who will be the Prime Minister, who will form the next government. But also, a keen eye will be kept on the economy and the markets in particular, and how these elections could affect India's market fundamentals. So at a time when Modi and markets, both the M's are in the focus, we're very privileged to be joined by a very special guest, best-selling author. He's out with a new book that we'll be speaking about, ace investor, political and economic trend spotter par excellence. Ruchir Sharma is with us here all the way from New York. Thanks very much, Ruchir, for joining us. Please give him a very big hand, ladies and gentlemen. Ruchir, in fact, is ideally placed from his vantage point to tell us not just what he foresees happening on the 4th of June, but Ruchir, what happens even beyond that to the economy, how the markets might react to the political churn. So I'm going to start, Ruchir, with a recent piece I read after your travels, and you've traveled extensively, including through Maharashtra, which you headlined, "You don't see a wave, you only see a heat wave." And this has led some to believe, is Ruchir Sharma suggesting that this election is far more competitive than 2019, a localized state-by-state contest, and this 400 par slogan of the BJP is hype. Is that how we should interpret a seemingly waveless election?
Yeah, Rajdeep, I think that's broadly correct, which is that now, once again, we all have to be modest about it, because having done 32 election trips over the last 25 years, and we sit down at the end of the trip, there were 20 of us who traveled together and have kept this tradition on for a long period of time. We broadly get the direction correct, but there's no way we can predict seats in terms of what happens. This time when we went out there, the broad direction, and remember, I wrote my column in the Financial Times 8 weeks ago, in which I had said that this is possibly the most predictable election that I have seen in terms of it, because all the opinion polls, everyone, the entire chorus then was that this is so predictable, right? That's what the entire thing was. So I began a column that way. Then we begin this election trip. We drive 2,000 kilometers all the way from the east to the west coast, Vijayawada to Mumbai, stop on the way at many places. And more than that, just speaking to stringers everywhere, right? Journalists, stringers everywhere. The feeling that I came away with at the end of the trip is that this is at least much more competitive than it appeared 8 weeks ago. So there was a big change in terms of the feedback that we picked up from the ground from each state. So I think that the broad direction in terms of is what we try and get, and it seems to me as if there's a big disconnect. If you look at the stock market today, you look at the Satta Bazaar today, they are predicting a frozen election. What do I mean by a frozen election? They think that the verdict is going to be unchanged compared to 2019. So the Satta Bazaar today, in fact, there are all sorts of quotes which go, but the most reliable quotes I know predict the BJP getting exactly the same number of seats as in 2019. The stock market so far has largely ignored this election. It's almost, there's been barely any volatility, in fact. I know every time there's a 1 or 2% swing, people sort of focus on it, but that's a stock market for you. It's been very stable through it. So the markets are predicting a frozen verdict. I think there is risk to the downside based on the travels that I've done and from what I've heard and having seen elections in India over the last 25 years.
No, you've said something big already. You're saying there's a risk, a downside risk, that the predictability which you saw 8 weeks ago and wrote about no longer exists. You're saying this is far more competitive, this is far more localized, presumably. Are you suggesting that 2024 could be a repeat, as some suggest, of 2004, when all pundits were proven wrong? And I'm sure you traveled then as well. Are you seeing traces of that at all?
No, it's very hard. Now, one thing is that having done forecasting for a long period of time, and I do it for markets, I don't do it for elections so much, but I do it for a living, is there's a great Russian proverb that I keep in mind here, which is that ignore history, you lose an eye, focus on it too much and you lose both. So I think that what you have to keep in mind here is that every election tends to be distinct. We keep referring to 2004 or 2019, but history rarely repeats itself in such a neat fashion. All I'm trying to say is that having traveled, it seems to me as if this is a much more localized election. Even if there is no visible anti-incumbency, so this is not 2014 as you pointed out, but 2004 was such a freak event. But even in 2004, I want to caution this, which is that when I look at our track record of the group also, we went out in 2004. We came back, we wrote that this is not India shining. I wrote a whole piece on this back then, but none of us, not one person had the guts to say that the BJP would lose that election. Not one. So we just have to be modest about it, that we have covered elections. And, you know, like you speak about the exit polls as well and stuff. Just as recently as last year, not one exit poll got Chhattisgarh correct in terms of it. Not one. So just have to be modest about what we see, but the broad direction is what we try and get. It's a great journey of India, and the broad direction seemed to be as if there is downside rather than upside risk from my perspective to the very strong consensus today in the market, including in the Satta Bazaar, that this is going to be a frozen verdict.